Jerod Sharp, who's been working with us for, what, 3 months or so, first got interested because we were doing some preliminary stuff in a more research-based, cures-based cell biology lab, and he actually liked it, and he has really good work with. He was one of the best students in that class, and he said, heck yeah. And so he's been doing this for a while. We're trying to optimize Western blotting procedures for our proteins, and he's done a lot of work in this and much more. We'll go to ASB in late March.
Hey everyone, my name is Jerod Sharp. I'm a junior here at JSU majoring in biology. Before I get started, I just want to thank the biology department for giving me the opportunity to not only research, but to also present the research I've been performing. I'd like to thank Dr. Sauterer for giving me the chance to perform this research with him. I'd like to thank Shelby Harris for mentoring me throughout this process and keeping me from becoming overly stressed. And I'd also like to thank Angela Lockridge. She came to the team a little bit late. When she got there, she was all in and was super helpful. So the title of this experiment was Testing Different Blocking Buffers and Concentration Effects on Signal Strength by Western Blotting against Cytochrome C. So we always start with a big question as to why. Well, our lab is interested in the interactions between histones and mitochondria, and we found that isolated histones will bind to isolated mitochondria and induce the release of Cytochrome C. And so we kind of know in mammalian cells at least that when the nucleus of a mammalian cell is damaged, it will release these histones, which will bind to the mitochondria and induce the release of mitochondrial protein Cytochrome C, which causes apoptosis or cellular death. So we're interested in furthering this research with yeast cells. But the biggest problem that we're finding is that the histone and Cytochrome C antibodies have poor binding affinity, which leads to a weak signal on the Western blot. Now, a Western blot is a process that we use to analyze the proteins in a nitrocellulose sheet. And one of the biggest aspects of Western blotting is the blocking buffer. The blocking buffer can be made of protein mixtures, or polymer molecules that are more chemically based. And what the blocking buffer does is it blocks the membrane of the nitrocellulose, so that the protein being analyzed is the only one that the antibodies are going to bind to. And without the blocking buffer, there'll be non-specific antibody binding, so the whole block will be covered in antibodies, and that's not going to do anybody any good. So we went through the Western blotting process. We had our potential blocking buffers used, and at the end, we took digital pictures of our blots, and we analyzed them on ImageJ, which is a software program ran by NIH, which measures the intensity of the protein on the blot. And our control, which is 5% milk, which is one of the most commonly used protein blocking buffers, that was used as our control, and our standard, which was quantitated to be 1.0x. And so let me introduce you to the potential blocking buffers we used. Like I said, our control was 5% milk. We also used polyethylene glycol, also known as PEG. We used polyvinyl pyrrolidine, otherwise known as PVP. We used hemoglobin. We used bovine serum albumin, otherwise known as BSA, and then gelatin. And the first round here was mainly focused on the 5% concentrations of our potential blocking buffers, as well as 2% PEG and 2% PVP, which in our abstract we hypothesized that would produce the strongest signal, as it had previously done with histones in previous research. And so 2% PVP and PEG was 2 times that of our control, which was 5% milk. 5% hemoglobin was 1.4 times that of the control. 5% BSA was 1.3 times the control, and 5% gelatin was significantly less than control, at 0.008 times our control. So in this round, the combination we had hypothesized had produced the greatest signal, so that was a really great sign. We moved to round 2, and the main focus was our 4% concentrations of our potential blocking buffers, as well as a 1% combination of PEG and PVP and a series of milk. So our 4% PVP alone was our greatest signal with the blocking buffers, and it was 1.18 times the control. Our 1% combination of PEG and PVP was 1.15 times our control. 4% hemoglobin was 1.1 our control, and 4% PEG was 1.05 our control, so just slightly greater than the 5% milk. Moving on, our 4% milk was 0.95 of our control. Our 3% milk was 0.74 times our control. Our 4% BSA was 0.72 times our control. 2% milk was our 0.64 times the control. And our 4% gelatin, coming dead last once again, was 0.34 our control. And in this round, we observed that milk at greater concentrations produces a stronger signal than milk at lower concentrations. Not only that, we're still kind of seeing that repeated pattern that combinations of PEG and PVP are producing very strong signals. Moving on to round 3, our primary focus was the 3% concentrations of our potential blocking buffers, as well as finishing a series of BSA and milk. So our concentration of 5% milk was our standard at 1.0x, and a combination of 3% PEG and PVP was the strongest signal at 1.29 times our control. 3% PVP alone was 1.286 times our control, so just right below the combination. And following after was 3% PEG at 1.27 our control. 3% BSA was 1.23 times our control. 2% BSA was 1.22 times our control. 3% hemoglobin was 1.19 the control. 1% BSA was 1.13 the control. And 1% milk was 0.82 the control. 3% gelatin was a 0.4 the control. So we observed in this round that not only does milk have that proportional concentration that the higher produces a greater signal than the lower, but so does BSA. And we're also seeing that repetitive nature that PEG and PVP is outperforming our protein-based blocking buffers. And of course, gelatin's coming dead last. In our last round, we finished up our series, which were mostly 2% concentrations and 1% concentrations. 2% PVP was 1.5 times our control, 1% PEG was 1.3 our control, and then our combination that we had recently visited in the first round of 2% PEG and PVP was 1.19, just falling short of the concentrations of PVP and PEG alone. 2% PEG was 1.02 times our control, so just right above the control. Our 2% hemoglobin was right at the same intensity of our control. 1% PVP was 0.94 our control, and the picture's a little blurry. It did not perform as we had intended. So I just tried to measure the surface area that would have potentially been if it had performed correctly, and it was 0.94 the control, but that's not a very reliable piece of data. 1% hemoglobin was 0.78 the control, 1% gelatin and 2% gelatin were both 0.5 times the control, but 1% gelatin's intensity level was just slightly higher. So in the end, the hypothesis we had created that combinations of PEG and PVP would perform the best with the Cytochrome C was mostly correct. 2 out of the 4 rounds, it was the #1 or the best with signaling against the Western blot. And if there was one to rank higher than the combination, it would be concentrations of PEG or PVP alone. But not only that, when we compared the results with PVP and PEG alone, concentrations of PVP compared to PEG, excluding our 1% PVP, which was kind of a bust, performed better than PEG. If we look at our milk and our BSA, like previously stated, their concentrations are proportional to the intensity level. So the higher concentrations produced a stronger signal than our lower concentrations. Conversely, gelatin was inversely proportional. So our highest concentrations of gelatin produced the weakest signal in the Western blot against Cytochrome C, whereas our lower concentrations produced a greater signal. And in the end, one thing that just overall the observation we are making is that the chemically based potential blocking buffers are outperforming the protein-based blocking buffers. So as we move on to further analyze these interactions between mitochondria and histones and yeast cells, we will more than likely be referring more so to these chemically based protein buffers with PVP and PEG than our protein-based buffers. And we will also more than likely be revisiting round 4, as proteins just sometimes don't want to behave and do what they need to do. So we will be going back and revisiting that round of Western blotting so we can get more reliable data. But with that, I'm very excited to move forward to the next step of experimentation with yeast using our PVP and PEG. Thank you.
Questions for our speaker? All right, let's thank our speaker.